I'm Kaylee, and today I'm reviewing the Jane Austen Mystery Series by Stephanie Barron. I started reading the series back in 2011, and I just finished the last book in this 15-book series yesterday. So it is time to review the entire 15-book series. And what better time than Jane Austen July? Before we dive into the Jane Austen Mystery Series, I'm going to reach back here to our Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're going to shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to Lil's Vintage World. I will leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you love Jane Austen. And of course, follow me over on Storygraph and Goodreads and Instagram and all the places. In the Jane Austen Mystery Series, Jane Austen herself is the main character. And we follow real events from Jane Austen's life and real people that she knew, and even things that she actually said in her letters or quotes of things from her books. But then there is also a fictionalized murder mystery, and Jane Austen goes around solving murders. In each of the books, the murder mystery is really good. Most of these are just very intriguing and clever. Jane Austen is following the clues and figuring out what happened. There are a couple of mysteries in the series where I could pretty much guess who the murderer was, but most of them really surprised me. I really like the intricacies of the murder mystery plots. There are plenty of red herrings, but then in the end, everything is explained and it all makes sense and the clues all fit together. I also really love that there are so many historical things included about Jane Austen and her time period. We get to learn about her family and her friends and places that she went and people that she knew. And there are also other historical figures that are included. So we get to learn just a little bit more about that era and about British culture in the Regency period. Even if maybe Jane Austen in real life didn't actually meet Lord Byron or whoever. Maybe she didn't really meet Nelson, I don't know. But we get to learn something about Waterloo and about those historical figures. So there's all this great history that it's just saturated in history, and I love that. I also really like the formal writing style that mimics that type of language from the Regency era. The books are all told from Jane Austen's perspective as if she was writing in her diary and telling us everything that has been happening to her as she follows the clues and solves a murder mystery. I feel like the dialogue is fairly close to what a real conversation might have looked like back then. The writing style just really immerses you in that language, in that history and culture. So let's take a quick look at each of the books, and I'll give you some of my favorite characters and my favorite scenes and different little mysteries and everything throughout the series. The series starts with Jane and the Unpleasantness at Scargrave Manor. Jane is visiting her friend Isabel Payne when Isabel's husband dies unexpectedly, and then Isabel is accused of murder. And so, of course, Jane comes to the rescue to prove the innocence of her friend. The clues lead Jane all the way to Newgate Prison and, unfortunately, the House of Lords. So things get pretty dangerous as Jane gets closer to the truth. At the time, back in 2017, I kind of didn't know what to expect from this new series that I was starting. And I ended up giving it 3 stars, but I think that now that I know more like what the series is all about and kind of what to expect from these books, I think I would probably give it a higher rating if I went back and reread it now. Because you go into anything with Jane Austen's name on it and you just expect it to be, genius, of course. So I think I came in with like certain expectations, and it was fine and it was good, But I liked it enough that I continued on with the rest of the series. The second book is Jane and the Man of the Cloth. Jane and her family are vacationing at Lyme. However, on their way to Lyme, their carriage is overturned and they are forced to take refuge in a house on the outskirts of town. Jane meets the darkly forbidding yet strangely attractive Mr. Geoffrey Sidmouth. The description says, "What murky secrets does the brooding Mr. Sidmouth seek to hide?" But a smuggler turns up hanged by his fellow smugglers, and Jane is trying to figure out who is the mysterious smuggler that is referred to as the Reverend. I gave this one 3 stars as well. So back in 2011, that is before I ever started Booktube. That is like right when Goodreads had first become a thing. And so I didn't really write reviews. So I don't have a review for this one. I just have a star rating. Maybe I should go back and reread some of the first books in the series so that I can actually write a review for some of these, you know? Then the third book is Jane and the Wandering Eye. It's Christmas of 1804, and she is bored to tears when her friend, known as the Gentleman Rogue, Lord Harold Trowbridge, has a task for her. He asks her to shadow his niece, who is fleeing from the attentions of an unsavory gentleman. However, things get dangerous when a man is stabbed in the theater. And on the victim's body, they find a pendant with a portrait of an eye. And Jane thinks if they could just figure out whose eye that is, that would probably be the killer. Or at least it would lead them to the killer. I do remember really enjoying this one and being very intrigued about the portrait of the eye. Like, it's not a face, it's just a person's eye, that's all. Apparently that was a thing back then. It was like this trend. So I found that really fascinating. There's some weird things in history. In the fourth book, Jane and the Genius of the Place, Jane is visiting her brother and sister-in-law at Godmersham Park when a mysterious lady is murdered at the Canterbury races. As Justice of the Peace, Jane's brother Edward is in charge of the investigation. And of course, Jane is all eagerness to help her brother to solve the puzzle. The best part of this book was seeing Jane's day-to-day interactions with her brother and sister-in-law, and we get to see a little bit more of her sister Cassandra as well. It's just really fun to imagine what their family dynamic might have been like. This is one where I was completely shocked at the ending, but I felt like there was still kind of some threads left hanging at the end of the plot that weren't quite explained satisfactorily. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars as well. Then we have Jane and the Stillroom Maid. Jane is just out walking in the hills in the country. She discovers the mutilated body of a man. Her suspicions are aroused when Mr. George Hemming wants to take the corpse over to Buxton rather than to Bakewell, which is closer. And then her suspicions are further aroused when it turns out it's actually a woman dressed in men's clothing. And does Mr. Hemming seem to know something about this? She is finally identified as the Stillroom Maid, a servant at one of the great houses. She apparently had a reputation as a witch. Through all of this, Jane turns to her friend, Mr. Harold Trowbridge, especially since she is worried that the mysterious Mr. Hemming is going to mess up the investigation. In this book, we see Jane and Lord Harold kind of getting closer. In the beginning, it was just Jane was somebody that he could rely on to get the job done and not have hysterics when she sees a dead body, you know? But now it's like they're really working together to solve the mystery and everything. However, this is one of the few books in the series that I did not care for that much. I don't know, the mystery just kind of never grabbed me. I just didn't care about the Stillroom Maid, I guess. Sorry. I gave this one 2 stars, but it's the only 2-star book in the entire series. And I kind of have to wonder with some of these, if I went back and read them now, I might enjoy them more. I think at this point in the series, I had been reading a bunch of them back to back, and I had just kind of gotten tired of it. And so I needed like a break and then to come back to it with more of a fresh mind. So I wonder if, because I'm such a mood reader, that might be why I gave this one a lower star rating. Then we have Jane and the Prisoner of Wool House. In this one, we get to see a lot more of Jane's brother, Frank, who is a post captain in the Royal Navy. Right now, he does not have a ship to command. He is ashore at the British port at Southampton. His friend Tom Seagrave is facing a court-martial, but he swears that he's innocent. He has been accused of murdering a French captain who had already surrendered. And Jane and her brother Frank are following the clues to figure out what happened to this French captain. Eventually, Jane realizes that the truth lies in Wool House, which is a prison for French prisoners of war. It all starts to look like a big conspiracy against Captain Seagrave. My favorite part of this book was seeing Jane and her brothers. I always love stories with really strong sibling relationships. And of course, we get to learn all this history about the war with Napoleon. So this one was a really good one. I gave it 3 stars. Then we come to Jane and the Ghosts of Netley. Lord Harold is back, and he asked Jane Austen to keep an eye on Netley Lodge, near the ruins of the ancient Netley Abbey, which is supposedly haunted. But Lord Harold is worried that there are French spies at work in the area, and he wants Jane to just keep an eye on who comes and goes. However, when a ship in the dockyards is set on fire and the shipwright is murdered, then Jane and Lord Harold know that it is definitely the work of spies, and there may be traitors in their midst. Once again, we get to see Jane with her brother Frank. I think it's really cute that she nicknamed him Fly, so she just calls him Fly. It's just so cute. And we get to see a lot more of Jane and her sister-in-law Mary, and we get to see how close they really were. It's lovely to see how Jane, you can tell how much she cares about her family, but they kind of exasperate her a lot as well. In this book, we see how Jane is especially annoyed with her mother a lot of the time. And the author portrays Mrs. Austen as being just always fussing over things and always worried, kind of like Mrs. Bennet, my poor nerves and everything. This is one where I really loved the mystery. It was very, very interesting, and I gave it 3 stars. Then we have Jane and his lordship's legacy. Jane inherits these old letters and journals, but they contain secrets about almost every prominent family in England. There are people who would do anything to keep those papers from being made public, including commit murder. In this one, Jane actually comes under personal danger, because for part of the plot, she has those letters in her possession, in her home, and her family are put in danger because there are people after these papers. In this book, we see a lot more of Jane and Cassandra together. I just love the sweet tenderness between them. You can just see that sibling love and connection between them. It's so lovely. This one I gave 4 stars. Then number 9 is Jane and the Barque of Frailty. So Jane Austen is visiting her brother and sister-in-law in London, and a foreign princess is murdered. Jane is accused of being involved, and so she starts her own investigation to find the real killer and clear her name. So a Barque of Frailty is a polite society term for a prostitute. And Jane discovers that one such lady of the night who is placed high in society might hold the answer to the murder. So in this book, we see a lot of Jane and her sister-in-law Eliza. And we see Jane kind of thrust into London society. She doesn't really like London. It's just very fast-paced. But Eliza wants to go out to concerts and parties and balls every night. And Jane is just like, can we please have a quiet night at home for once? This one was really interesting because it explores more of the darker underside of London society and how people who are high-born, people in high society are always trying to cover up their misdeeds. Then we have Jane and the Madness of Lord Byron. This one was kind of crazy because Lord Byron was kind of crazy, okay? Jane Austen and her brother Henry spend 2 weeks at Brighton for their health. But as soon as they arrive, they discover a young lady who's been kidnapped and tied up in a carriage. And it turns out it's Lord Byron's carriage. So they free her and they restore her to her father. But the father accuses her of purposefully running away. A few days later, though, the girl is found murdered. And Jane suspects that Byron could be the culprit. Every woman who meets Byron feels his magnetic charm. And even Jane herself is not immune. He is wild, he is arrogant, he's very charming, but is he a murderer? In this one, we see Jane and her brother Henry are really close. I love how Henry just really respects Jane's opinion. He respects her writing and he really relies on her. He values Jane and her keen mind. So it was really lovely to see that sibling relationship explored in this book. Number 11 is Jane and the Canterbury Tale. So Jane is visiting her brother Edward at his large estate, and their acquaintance Adelaide Fisk is getting married again. But her previous husband, who was assumed to be dead, shows up on her wedding day. But he shows up dead. He was thought to have died abroad years ago, but his murdered body is discovered adjacent to Edward's property. And as the magistrate, of course, Edward must investigate with Jane to help. This mystery hinged on relationships between people, like people who knew each other years and years and years ago. So this one felt almost like a cold case because the circumstances of the guy's murder are like not going to lead you anywhere. You've got to figure out who hated him 10 years ago. Like, who is holding a grudge, you know? And so Jane really has to dive into all this history of like this lady, and she married him, but then they had this son, and then he did not like his uncle, and like all kind of stuff. So there's all these intertwining relationships between people, and of course only Jane has a keen mind to figure out the clues. I gave this one 3 stars. It was a good one. One of my favorite books in this entire series is Jane and the 12 Days of Christmas. So Jane, Cassandra, and their mother, Mrs. Austen, are all visiting their old country parsonage where now Jane's brother James is residing. And they visit the Chute family at their estate for the Christmas festivities. However, a military messenger is found dead, apparently thrown from his horse. But Jane thinks it must be murder, and one of the guests, an artist, agrees with her. So this is where we are first introduced to a now recurring character in the rest of the series, Raphael West, who is an artist. He immediately recognizes that Jane has an analytical mind and she can help him make sense of these clues. They're just guests at the house, but they kind of take it upon themselves to clear away suspicion and find the murderer. The best part of this book is learning about Regency Christmas traditions. They have games and food and parties and other just little family habits at Christmas time. And they have festivities planned for the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany. In this book, we see a lot more of Jane's brother, James, and his wife, Mary. Apparently, those two just did not have very pleasant personalities, but they all make an effort to be together for their family Christmas. I especially like the scenes, of course, with Jane and her sister Cassandra. It's just a complete delight to imagine the Austen family at Christmas and doing little presents for each other and all kinds of lovely Christmassy things. I gave this one 4 stars. Then we have Jane and the Waterloo Map. Jane is invited to the palace of the Prince Regent to visit his library. She is delighted that the Prince Regent has granted her the honor of dedicating her next book to him, even though she secretly despises the Prince Regent for his selfishly lavish lifestyle. While Jane is visiting in the library, a military man stumbles in, foaming at the mouth, evidently poisoned, and he collapses. Before he dies, he manages to whisper 2 words to Jane: Waterloo Map. And Jane begins to investigate what the poor man could have meant. And why would he have been poisoned in the Prince Regent's own house? This one was really cool because we get to learn more about the military campaigns surrounding Waterloo. And in this one, we see Jane's brother Henry again, and they are both working together on this investigation. But my favorite part of this book was the scenes between Jane and her niece Fanny. Jane is supposed to be acting as a chaperone to her niece, but she's not doing a very good job because they keep getting distracted by the mystery and following the clues. This mystery was really good. I was completely shocked at the ending. I just had no idea who the murderer was right up until the very end. I gave this one 4 stars. And number 14 is Jane and the Year Without a Summer. Jane and her sister are visiting Cheltenham. They hope that sampling the sulfurous water will improve Jane's health. They stay at a boarding house and they're very curious about the other guests at the boarding house. One of the boarders is a Miss Williams, a young lady who is confined to a wheelchair. She is constantly fussed over and spoiled by her faithful friend. And there's a married couple who are always complaining and making things unpleasant for everyone. And Jane is surprised to find that her friend Raphael West, the artist, appears to know one of the other boarders, Mrs. Smith, who works with a theater company. But when a murder occurs at a masquerade ball, Jane realizes there must be some connection to the people at the boarding house. In each of the books where we see more of Jane's sister, Cassandra, Jane just thinks it's hilarious that Cassandra pretends not to care about gossip. Like, no, it's not good to gossip about your neighbors, you know? But actually, Cassandra, I don't know, but she loves to gossip. She is very eager and curious to know all about people. So it's just adorable to see the way that Jane and Cassandra interact and talk with each other and take care of one another. This is another one where I was really shocked at the ending. As it got closer to the end, I kind of guessed, but I was like, no, that can't be it. And then it turns out I was right. This is called The Year Without a Summer because in real history, there was a volcano like on the other side of the world that went off, but the dust and the soot and whatever from that volcano created weather patterns that made for a very cold, rainy summer in England. So that's why it's called The Year Without a Summer. And that's really true. That really happened in Jane's time. This one was actually so good that I gave it 5 stars. And then the last book, the 15th book in the series, is Jane and the Final Mystery. At this point, Jane knows that she is nearing the end of her life. Her health has been deteriorating for months, and the doctors give her about 6 months to live. However, when her old friend Elizabeth Heathcote is in trouble, Jane and her nephew Edward are ready to help. Elizabeth's son, William, has been accused of murdering a fellow classmate at Winchester College, a boys' boarding school. Jane's nephew Edward attended the school, and he tells his Aunt Jane all about the college and how William endured hazing and cruel pranks. But could young William have lashed out at his tormentors to the extent of murdering one of them? I thought this was really interesting to see Jane Austen entering the exclusive world of a prestigious boys' school. They have their own lingo and traditions and a very specific hierarchy of masters and prefects. And Jane is shocked to learn about the awful beatings that the younger boys would suffer at the hands of the older boys, and how they're forced to run errands and clean and work like servants for the prefects. Another interesting part of this one was that Elizabeth's son, William, who is accused of the murder, has actually developed a stutter. This is a speech impediment that was considered by many in Jane Austen's time to be indicative of low intelligence. So because of this prejudice, he is not believed when he asserts that he is innocent. I really like seeing Jane and her nephew in this book. They work together to solve the mystery, and Edward is very solicitous for his aunt's health. He is attentive and courageous and very intelligent to help his Aunt Jane in this murder investigation. I gave the final book 4 stars. Overall, like just as a whole, I think I give the whole series 4 stars. Like there were some that I really loved and some that I was just like, it's fine. This is such a fantastic series. If you love Jane Austen, not only will you learn some real history about her and her family and her time and that culture, but you also get a fun murder mystery thrown in. The last 5 or 6 books in the series I actually listened to on audiobook, read and narrated by Kate Redding. And I think that definitely enhanced my enjoyment of the books. So you can see that the later books in the series, on average, have a higher star rating than the ones in the beginning. I think that is entirely due to Kate Redding's narration in the audiobooks. I just loved it so much. She really brings the story to life. Please leave me a comment and let me know, have you read any of the books in this series? Did you enjoy them as much as I did? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.